by the judge of the living and the dead, to depart from the servant of God.
The Exorcist, believed by many to be the most frightening horror movie of all time. It broke box office records and terrified a nation.
The power of Christ!
The Exorcist was inspired by the true story from 1949 of a young boy said to be possessed by the devil. His exorcism recorded in an extraordinary diary.
When I read the diary, it electrified me. This was the real thing.
26 people are thought to have witnessed the horrifying events said to be caused by demonic forces.
Legion was written across his chest, which of course means devil.
And today, many people still believe that Satan walks among us.
The first time I prayed for a truly possessed person, they slithered right out of the seat like a snake.
However disturbing the claims, scientists insist the explanation does not lie in the supernatural.
The brain is responsible for abnormal behavior, not bad influences.
Kiss your cross.
Now, using rare archive and the latest scientific discoveries, we reveal the real story of the exorcism that inspired one of the greatest horror movies ever made. Cottage City, Maryland, a quiet corner of suburbia, and the birthplace of the most famous horror movie in history, The Exorcist. The inspiration for the film was the 1949 exorcism of a 13-year-old boy who was said to be possessed by the devil. To this day, he has never spoken publicly about his ordeal. Dr. Alvin Kagi went to school with the boy and lived in the same neighborhood.
My parents knew the individual's parents because they played canasta. There was a group of, I think there were 4 or 5 couples. That was how I got to know this person. He was quiet. He was not the most popular person in town. He was not athletic, a little more studious, I guess.
To the outside world, the boy's family epitomized the respectable face of Middle America.
His mother was somewhat like he was, quiet. His father was a little more outgoing. His father and my father, they would talk. Normal's not a point, it's a range, and they certainly were in their normal range. Oh yeah, absolutely.
But in the summer of 1948, their lives dramatically changed. The boy's aunt introduced him to a Ouija board.
How does it work?
A game that supposedly brings communication with the spirit world. At first, it seemed like harmless fun. But then, a few weeks later, the aunt unexpectedly died of natural causes.
And so what did the teacher want you to do with this?
Shortly afterwards, the family started to hear unusual sounds. Frantic scratching and knocking under the floorboards. They blamed the sounds on mice and called in pest control, but nothing was found. The family began to fear the dead aunt was trying to contact them from beyond the grave. They said that night after night, the strange noises increased. The house echoed with the sound of marching feet. And then, they claimed, events took an even more sinister turn. The mother discovered her son's mattress shaking violently.
What's going on? Oh no.
And soon, other furniture began to move, apparently of its own will.
I remember my father telling my mother that the individual sat in a chair, and the chair threw him out on the floor. They were witnesses to this, and that added to the mystery of it. I thought, well, he was a little different. And I guess my thinking was, what is this?
At night, the boy's behavior became increasingly disturbed. The family reported seeing bizarre marks and scratches appearing on his body.
I never could come to grips with what it was. Extraordinary would be on the very low side of my thinking about it. And still to that extent today.
As the disturbing events continued, the family arranged to visit the local county mental hygiene clinic for help. But psychiatrists were unable to find anything wrong with their son. With nowhere left to turn, they looked to their local church for guidance and were advised to contact a Catholic priest named Father Albert Hughes. Hughes died in 1980, but Father Bober was a close friend and one of the few people he confided in about the episode many years later.
I said, Father Hughes, did you see the film The Exorcist? He says, oh yes, I did several times. And I said, you wouldn't by any chance be the priest who was involved in it, right? In 1949, that the film is based on? And he looked at me and he said, I am the priest.
Father Hughes' first meeting with the boy was in February 1949.
He noticed a very dark stare, almost as if there was nothing behind the eyes. When he stared at the books went across the table. When he stared at Father Hughes' chair, the chair lifted up, levitated, and went right against the wall. And Father Hughes was like, oh my Lord, what am I dealing with? Father Hughes asked him in Latin, what is your name? And he said, I am Legions, indicating there's more than one demon in him.
These strange events led Father Hughes to believe that the boy was possessed, not just by one, but by many demons, and that the only way to free him was to perform an exorcism. The belief that people can be possessed by evil spirits is common to many religions and cultures. But exorcism is most closely associated with Christianity, and especially with the Roman Catholic Church. Father Tom Itanaya is sanctioned by the Church as an exorcist and has performed the ritual more than 20 times.
When you first see an exorcism, a chill goes up your spine because the manifestation, a serious manifestation of evil, is never a pretty thing. Satan is the most powerful of all the demons. He would be the CEO of the corporation, and he has lots of employees and lots of minions that coordinate with him in the power to drag human souls to hell.
A priest conducting an exorcism must recite a specific series of prayers in Latin dating back to the 16th century. The Church believes these prayers invoke the power of God against the demonic entities, forcing them to abandon their victim.
The most important object to be used in a ritual of exorcism is the ritual book itself, called De Exorcismis et Supplicationibus Quibus Dam. A priest can read through the exorcism ritual in the space of about 10 minutes, and then he repeats it as needs be. And then we have the crucifix, and this is a part of the exorcism ritual which is recommended to use, and it is the symbol of the devil's defeat. I actually use one that is wooden just in case, for some reason during the ritual, they might grab it out of my hands and try to hit me. It wouldn't hurt as much as a metal one.
The Church believes that exorcism unleashes powerful and dangerous forces. Few priests are deemed to have the spiritual strength to perform the ritual.
The first time I prayed for a truly possessed person, I put the crucifix on that person's head, and they slithered right out of the seat like a snake.
But in 1949, the ritual was uncharted territory for Father Albert Hughes. After doctors failed to reach a diagnosis, Hughes decided the 13-year-old boy he met was possessed not by one, but by several demons. With no other priests in his archdiocese sanctioned to perform the ritual, Hughes would have to conduct his very first exorcism. The boy was admitted to a hospital run by Jesuit brothers in Georgetown, Washington, D.C.
When he went to the hospital, the boy was apparently already very volatile. Just shaking and shaking and getting more and more violent and spitting, screaming, all kinds of profanities. So the nurses restrained him, both of his wrists.
Hughes recited the exorcism prayers for 3 nights, but there was no improvement. The boy only became increasingly violent.
And the boy was like foaming at the mouth and screaming and moving his head and shouting and everything. The boy just breaks the restrainer, puts his hand in under the bed, grabs a spring, pulls it out, and cuts Father Hughes from here all the way, way up to the elbow. Get away!
The injury forced Father Hughes to abandon the exorcism. He felt he didn't have the spiritual strength to see it through.
Albert Hughes was very, very emotionally dismayed, discouraged, upset that he failed to do it. He failed.
The boy returned home. The family remained fearful for their son. They claimed strange welts and scratches continued to appear on his body. And then one day, the mother thought she saw something extraordinary. The words St. Louis branded on her son's chest. Since they had relatives living in the city, they took this as a sign to go and stay with them. They moved into this house, hoping it would help them to escape the terrifying events.
The feeling that I had from what I heard was he'd gone away for some physical medical reasons. He was ill and they'd gone to St. Louis for some treatment. I would say most people that would give a quick opinion say, oh, he's crazy. And so it just wasn't talked about.
Modern science would one day have another explanation for the boy's behavior. But at the time, very little was understood about how the brain works. Far from helping, the move to St. Louis signaled a terrifying new chapter in the family's ordeal. The desperate parents were convinced their son was still possessed by demons. With doctors unable to help, they again turned to the church.
Would you all please join me in prayer? Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. Christ have mercy.
They met with
Christ
Father William Bowden,
Lord have
a
mercy.
senior priest
Lord
from the
have
St.
mercy.
Louis Diocese who died
Holy
in
Mary, Mother of God.
1983.
We call him Father Bill.
He was a very family man, very close to all his siblings, his nieces, his nephews. He apparently had a lot of experience with life in the Army. He was not a cloistered monk. I mean, he knew what was going on in the world. But he also, on the other hand, I was probably one of the holiest men I ever knew. Humble, sweet, caring. I mean, really wonderful.
Father Bowden, too, concluded the boy was possessed. One exorcism had already ended in injury. It would be his responsibility to win the battle that Father Hughes had lost.
I'm sure he was a perfect choice to perform something like that. He was a very strong character.
Every detail of the exorcism over the following 6 weeks was faithfully recorded in a remarkable diary kept by the priests. The diary was published in its entirety for the first time by author Tom Allen.
It was the most stunning piece of paper I think I ever saw. I realized I had something that few people had read, and that was going through the sort of the eradication of evil from a young boy's soul. I mean, it was everything that a writer could think of.
Father Bowden believed the task ahead would be difficult and dangerous.
Father Bowden doesn't want to do it. He doesn't feel he has the training, but he feels obliged to help the kid. I mean, it comes down to helping a kid. That's all he thinks about at that point.
He chose several priests to help him, and a seminarian named Walter Halloran.
They felt they needed a strong young guy to hold the kid down if the kid started acting physical, which they knew was going to happen.
On the first Principio, there was an immediate reaction.
Imperat tibi Deus. Imperat tibi majestas Christi. Imperat tibi Deus.
Get away!
Imperat tibi Deus Spiritus Sanctus. Imperat tibi Sanctorum Crucis.
The kid was spitting and making sexual overtures and swearing and cursing.
Christ have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Holy Mary, Mother of God.
This time, the priests recited the exorcism prayers every night for 3 weeks. The boy reacted so violently that they sometimes had to pin him down.
His blows were beyond the strength of the ordinary boy.
They sometimes held a pillow over his face to stop him from swearing. The strange marks continued to appear on his skin. At times he would become calmer, and the priests hoped the demons had left him. But these interludes would never last.
Sacramentum. Tibi Deus. Imperat tibi majestas Christi. Imperat tibi Deus Petrus. Imperat tibi Deus Filius.
This becomes a routine for several days, to the point where Father Bowden realizes that it's too disruptive to the family, and they've got to move the kid to someplace else.
The boy was admitted to another hospital, this one run by an ancient order of Catholic monks, and confined in a room where no one could hear him.
And it's the kind of room where you can't open the door from the inside. It's really for mental patients of that era.
That night, the ritual continued.
Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Christ, have mercy.
The commands of the formula caused violent reactions.
Christ, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Holy Mary, Mother of God.
Pray for him. Imperat tibi Deus. Imperat tibi majestas Christi.
I mean, Bowden was a wreck at the end of the day.
Spiritus Sanctus.
He had a day job. He was running a parish, and he would be doing that all night long, maybe till 4 o'clock in the morning. And he broke out in boils. He was mentally exhausted. His brother who lived in St. Louis was very concerned about whether he's just going to be able to live through it.
The priests were becoming desperate. To them, the boy's demons were putting up a fierce resistance that could endanger his life and their own.
In the course of the evening, R broke Halloran's nose.
They decided to baptize him a Catholic in a bid to strengthen him in his battle against the demons.
Father Bowdern gets the idea that if the kid converts to Catholicism, then somehow the kid will gather the strength of being in the Catholic Church.
The following night, the priest tried to force him to take Holy Communion.
Attempts to administer the sacrament of the Eucharist roused the devil more than ordinarily.
Father Bowdern does feel that is going to be a turning point, because if the kid accepts the communion wafer, then that's going to counteract the demon.
When the boy finally did accept communion, they hoped it signaled a turning point. But they were wrong.
Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Jesús.
They persevered with the exorcism for another 7 days, and then a sudden change. The boy spoke in a clear voice.
Satan, Satan, I am Saint Michael, and I command you, Satan, and the other evil spirits to leave the body now.
In Christian belief, Saint Michael is the chief archangel who holds power over Satan. The priest believes Saint Michael himself had driven the demons from the boy. After 6 weeks of reciting the ritual, their prayers had finally been answered. The next day, the boy took Holy Mass for the first time. A few days later, the family returned home to Cottage City and quietly slipped back into their old life.
To my knowledge, when it ended, and that was all. So that makes it somewhat mysterious to me. I really had almost no contact with them, and I don't think that the parents ever got back into playing the cards. I think they pretty well stayed more to themselves than ever.
By early summer, the boy started a new school. His bizarre behavior never returned. After he left school, he went to work for NASA. He chose to keep his identity hidden, but he says he remembers nothing of his ordeal. The story was published by local newspapers before drifting into obscurity. But then, in 1973, the St. Louis exorcism surged back to life on the big screen. The Exorcist brought demonic possession into the modern world and set the stage for a fierce debate between the forces of religion and science. When The Exorcist premiered, it was an overnight sensation.
Let's see what the keep away! The sow is mine!
Very startling, realistic to me. sickening.
I don't know, it's just really too much.
The Exorcist was an adaptation of a best-selling book by author William Blatty. The film broke box office records and was nominated for 10 Academy Awards. It won Blatty an Oscar for Best Screenplay. Blatty took his inspiration from the St. Louis exorcism, a story he first heard while he was a student at Georgetown University.
It electrified me. I was a staunchly believing Catholic who also appreciated any little bit of help he could get overcoming his doubts. And this case did a job on me.
For many, the similarities between the St. Louis exorcism and the movie are striking.
And I would take the diary and look at the film and try to see where theatricality began and ended and the reality was. And it was a very hard thing.
To protect the identity of the boy, Blatty changed him to a girl, and many of the film's scenes were invented and exaggerated. Although Father Bowden was forbidden by his superiors to discuss the case with Blatty in detail, the author did have access to the day-by-day diary kept by the priests.
There was the backstory prior to the exorcism of use of the Ouija board and these wrappings. There was the shaking of the bed. Now, that, according to Bowden's diary, did occur to some extent. The paranormal brandings all over the boy's body, 30 times a day, by the way, according to Father Bowden.
Most Holy Virgin who was designed.
Blatty was finally convinced the case was genuine by this letter, now in Tom Allen's archives.
We have a letter which Father Bowden writes to Bill Blatty when Blatty is working on the book, and the book will become the movie. Dear Mr. Blatty, I can assure you of one thing. The case in which I was involved was the real thing. I had no doubt about it then, and I have no doubt about it now.
Had it not been for that last sentence and the fact that he had kept a detailed diary day by day, I would not have written the novel. It confirmed what Father Bowden, the Exorcist, had told me in the first place, that this was the real thing.
Holy Mary, Mother of God,
Pray for him.
holy angels of God,
The diaries record 26 people who directly witnessed the paranormal phenomena. 3 sisters who grew up in St. Louis learned of the exorcism from the priests involved.
I think it took a lot from them physically, emotionally. It would just be terrible.
You would never have known that these men had ever gone through anything like that. I don't think, do you?
To this day, they are adamant that the priests were reliable witnesses.
Father Bolin said he just sort of loosened his hold and grip on him just a little bit, and with that, this young man lifted his arm, hit him right across the forehead, lifted him off his feet, and shoved him into the wall across the room. Now, Father Bolin was a large, muscular man, so to have something like this happen, to see the strength in this young man was very upsetting, I would imagine.
It frightened me. You know what the thing that frightens you about it is, could it happen to me? Because this boy was a very normal boy.
Many people are convinced this was a real case of possession ended by an exorcism. But today, scientists believe there is an alternative explanation. To discover the facts, they face 2 challenges: to explain both the boy's extreme behavior and the supernatural events that so many claim to have witnessed. Professor Michael Persinger heads the Behavioral Neuroscience program at Laurentian University. He believes the root of all religious experience comes not from God, but from the most complex creation known to the universe, the human brain.
This is a human brain. It doesn't seem like very much, but this is the entirety of that person. He lived, he experienced, he had dreams, he felt he was special. Everything was in this small organ. That was its entirety.
For Persinger, it is the brain that holds the key to explaining the boy's condition.
When it comes to religious experience, the brain generates all behaviors, no matter how mysterious they may be. If there's mysterious or odd or even paranormal behavior is being displayed, there's an area or areas of the brain that are being fired in a specific pattern. And so the critical thing is to find the area of the brain and the pattern of activity that generates it.
As a clinical psychologist, Persinger has treated dozens of people who the church believes to be demonically possessed.
It's called dissociative states or depersonalized states. I've seen individuals where the devil takes over. They were all Roman Catholics. They lower their voice, their facial muscles change. They say something usually that's scatological, cussing, profanity, usually at me.
Persinger discovered the cases all shared a striking similarity. Unusual spikes of electrical activity that triggered mini seizures in the right hemisphere of the brain.
The primary experiences are psychological or perceptual. They can experience apparitional phenomena, they can experience voices, they can experience motor movements.
He believes this could also explain the boy's condition. When his aunt unexpectedly died, he was 13 years old, an age at which the brain is undergoing major changes and is extremely vulnerable to traumatic events.
When you have a loss like that, for some individuals, if the cortisol levels increase, that's the stress hormone, and if you're right at the right stage or the appropriate stage of development, you can have all kinds of alterations that are often considered paranormal. And adolescence, pre-adolescence, about 10 to 13, is one of the peaks in human suggestibility.
This surge of stress hormones could have triggered mini brain seizures in his right temporal lobe, a highly creative area responsible for vision and emotion. When the exorcism began, far from being a cure, it may have been the final catalyst for the highly vulnerable boy.
The problem with exorcism applied indiscriminately is that it could be iatrogenic. Iatrogenic means the treatment itself causes the phenomena. If you harass a person nightly with the best of intentions, with the same rituals, the same repetitions, again and again, to the labile brain, you can imprint in it changes which are more or less permanent and make the phenomena worse and worse.
The ritual itself may have caused a frenzied state in which he was not aware of his actions.
His muscles would have been stronger, the discharges would have been very intense. He would have shown all the characteristics of a Tourette-like characteristic, which is cussing and profanity, tics and groans. His voice would have changed potentially.
These electrical discharges may have also triggered muscle spasms that could explain the shaking of the boy's bed, which were attributed to mysterious forces. And they might also account for other aspects of the boy's condition. The diaries record feats of superhuman strength that seem beyond the capabilities of a slightly built 13-year-old.
It's not like superhuman strength. It's what the muscles can do. If you contract muscles And most of the time your muscles are not contracting at the same time, even when you're walking. But if you contract them very quickly, so they're all discharging at the same time and contracting at the same time, you have tremendous strength. That's really the secret between or behind some of the martial arts, where the screaming and the contraction produces all of those muscles firing at the same time. You can double, triple the actual force of impact.
Persinger is convinced the brain is responsible for all paranormal and religious experience, and he believes he can prove it.
And so the critical thing is to find out what patterns are involved and to reproduce it with the experiment.
To do that, Persinger developed a device nicknamed the God Helmet. The helmet fired electromagnetic waves straight into the right temporal lobe, the center of creativity. His aim? To trigger the sensation of a supernatural entity. It worked. 80% of the volunteers reported experiencing some kind of godly or spiritual presence. Intriguingly, their beliefs influenced what they experienced. And for some, the presence was not a benevolent one.
We have a rating scale about unpleasant to pleasant. They've all rated as very, very unpleasant, and we'll say they felt something that made them cold. It was a feeling of some kind of insidious, kind of sinister phenomena. Depending upon their belief system, they may attribute it to graylings, which some have, alien type things. Others attribute it to a Satan or devil type phenomenon. It's not very frequent, but it does happen.
But unusual brain activity alone cannot explain the other mysterious phenomena. Witnesses recorded seeing welts and scratches appearing on the boy's skin. They may have been caused by the priests holding him down as he thrashed around. But what led people to believe that these marks were a supernatural message? Dr. Andrew Newberg is a neuroscientist who studies the relationship between the brain and religious experience.
Back in that time period, we didn't know very much about psychiatry, and therefore probably more likely to turn to the possibility that could this be a religious or spiritual phenomenon, then start trying to treat that child as if they had some kind of spiritual malady, rather than saying that, oh, we need to get this person to see if they are having seizures or having some other infection or something like that.
Newberg thinks that the messages on the boy's skin can be explained by a phenomenon called pareidolia, which causes people to attribute meaning to random images or sounds. They find hidden messages in records played backwards, or see images in trees and clouds and even food. These images are often interpreted as religious figures. To a non-believer, this looks like a normal tree. But thousands of Christians perceived an image of the Virgin Mary.
If somebody believed that an individual was possessed, then they might continue to look for signs and ways of trying to interpret whatever is going on around them as being related to that. If they see something's moved, they might be more likely to say that was because of the possession rather than that was something that accidentally got knocked over. It's entirely possible that people might start to interpret and perceive things in ways that are maybe more consistent with their overall belief as to what's going on.
When the boy suddenly returned to normal, the priests took it as proof that the ritual had been a success. But for scientists, this abrupt change in behavior is consistent with the adolescent brain.
I mean, that's pretty typical, because remember, what development means is your brain is changing, not size, but the intricate wiring. So In the early stages of pubescence and peripubescence, there's tremendous changes going on. So usually they just outgrow it, quite literally. What that means is the brain changes structure. Remember, structure dictates function. Change the structure, you change the function.
Modern science explains what in 1949 seemed inexplicable. But despite this, belief in demonic possession is booming, thanks in part to the cultural phenomenon of The Exorcist. Before the release of the Exorcist movie in 1973, few people had heard of the ritual of exorcism.
Warner Brothers wanted me to change the title of the film and the novel. Why? They took a survey. Nobody knew what the hell an exorcist was.
But the movie relaunched the practice of exorcism into the modern public consciousness. Blatty is unrepentant.
My Jesuit friends told me that there was such a run on the confessional box in the wake of the release of the film. It was like a thundering herd that somehow the film made, which I had hoped it would, as I'd hoped the novel would, real the possibility of demonic possession and therefore of the reality of spiritual forces.
The film created an extraordinary legacy, breathing new life into an ancient ritual. By the early 1990s, 2 decades after the film's release, an estimated 1,300 exorcisms were being performed every year in the United States. The Pontifical University, part of the Vatican in Rome, now runs a 10-week exorcism course for aspiring seminarians and priests.
The church usually responds to what they call a pastoral need. It's directly related to the loss of faith in our Western cultures. We have science, we have materialism, we don't need God, and that's why we're seeing the Vatican call for a greater training of exorcists. We see an international society for exorcists that's been set up.
In 1993, 51-year-old Pat Redding from Connecticut was referred to the Catholic Church. Her exorcism was recorded in this extraordinary footage. She underwent the ritual 13 times before she was declared free of her demons.
Come on. Kiss your cross.
At the time, her daughter Michelle was 15.
She went through being examined by a doctor, CAT scan, head scan, everything checked out fine. And she met with 2 separate psychiatrists. She spoke with them, and they found her to be extremely a well-grounded, sane individual.
Quiet, devil. Be gone. Be gone.
It was the scariest thing I'd ever seen, and probably the most frightening thing I will ever see is to see your own mother go under possession, and you know it's real.
The Catholic Church advises that before a priest performs an exorcism, he should first rule out psychiatric illness. But that can be difficult, and performing an exorcism on someone suffering such an illness can be dangerous, even fatal. In 1976, Anneliese Mitchell, a German student, underwent an exorcism lasting nearly a year. She died of severe malnutrition after trying to starve the demons out of her body. Doctors testified in court that her symptoms were consistent with a psychiatric disorder. But the Church remains convinced that if it's carried out correctly, exorcism is still an important religious duty.
Helping a person to be free of demonic problems is one of the most satisfying things that I've ever done as a priest. I just love seeing people become free of their evil by the power of the church helping them.
A belief in demons is certainly resilient. In a 2005 poll, 42% of American adults said they thought demonic possession was real.
I believe that possession is possible. Yes, authentic possession is I do believe that. I believe that partly because if it weren't true, then Jesus Christ is a liar. And all his apostles, the evangelists, were liars. And I don't think that's likely.
From a scientific point of view, I see the risks associated with maintaining a fallacy. People are responsible for their behavior, not bad influences. The brain is responsible for abnormal behavior. To understand the brain, we can stop it. But if you assume it's some kind of non-physical, invisible entity that can never be verified, then you have basically hamstrung and limited the capacity of our species forever.